All right, everybody, welcome to our one of our monthly events as the Virginia Worker. We are a pro-working class publication based out of Virginia. We feature independent working class analysis and various labor struggles happening across our state. If you want to know more information, please visit us on thevirginiaworker.com. You can also see us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And tonight we're joined by the Workers' Front of Ukraine, which is a Marxist-Leninist underground organization from the Ukraine that provides agitation, propaganda, and education to Ukrainian workers. Just to lay down some ground rules, we're going to let the members of the Workers' Front of Ukraine present on their organization, their history, and their analysis of things happening in Ukraine right now with the war. And after that, we will open it up to question and answer period. So if you want to ask questions after their presentation, you can type them in the chat box and we will read them off as they come in. And without further ado, we'll pass it off to Max and Tanya to present on the Workers' Front of Ukraine.
Okay, I will start then. So we would like to introduce our organization. We are relatively a young organization of Leninist Marxists of Ukraine. Our organization came to life in 2019, like as a very first type of organization, but we actually became the RFU, today, probably more like in 2020. So yeah, we are kind of a young organization of more or less young people of Ukraine. And since in Ukraine the communism or anything attached to communism is banned, we have to work from the underground. And therefore we also work mostly online. We have Telegram, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. We also try to do offline stuff such as graffiti and posters. And in terms of our work with people, we also focus on providing legal aid. And since the war has broken out, we have been diverting a lot of powers to help soldiers with their legal issues, as despite those men giving their lives for the current bourgeois government, they often even don't get their official benefits guaranteed by the law. So we're trying to sway the soldiers into our agenda by protecting their rights. That's kind of our agenda for our organization and our work. Max, do you have anything to add?
Also, I'd like to add that we have some trade union activities, including activities with Ukrainian refugees in Europe too.
Should we continue going through the questions sent to us? That's the question to our comrades at the Virginia Worker.
Sure. Yeah. So if anyone who's a participant in this event has any questions, please type them in the chat and we will read them off as they come along. I know we've had some questions coming in before this, and one of the things I think folks were wondering was, how do you assess the USSR? Under Zelensky and kind of the pro-Western regime in Ukraine since 2014, there has been this effort to, condemn the USSR and Ukraine as a Soviet state within the USSR. And just sort of wondering, like, how do you all interpret that? Do you see the USSR as like a social imperialist state? Was it oppressive towards the Ukrainian state, as we hear a lot of the times in Western media?
Yeah, thanks you for the question. Obviously, there is a lot of interest for the current government to position the history of the first communist state as an oppressive state. In our organization, we are also studying and working out a more objective line of history. And in our view, of course, Soviet Union had a lot of issues, some mistakes, especially in the later phases of the Soviet Union. But we are opposing this idea of social imperialism. We clearly see that Soviet Union was a state which was protecting the workers of all nations. And overall, it was a positive project which has changed lives not only of people of the Soviet Union, but also of workers of other countries, including countries which were completely outside of sphere of influence, as many worker rights had to be introduced in capitalistic countries just to stop the red menace spreading into their countries. Max, do you want to add anything?
I would like to say that Soviet age for Ukraine was not only not oppressive, but Soviet age it was the best age for Ukrainian culture, Ukrainian science, Ukrainian theory. I mean, Marxism. The man who was responsible for the Soviet space program was a Ukrainian too, Korolev. Ukrainian culture, a lot of good singers, a lot of movies, and nowadays all of this is gone. Ukraine has no culture, has no science, but just some postmodernist things, just some ideas stolen from the West. I think that Soviet age was absolutely the best age for Ukraine.
I would like also to add a few things which come to my mind right now. Obviously, economy isn't everything for people, but economy often shows us like how much a nation, how good does it live, and how much benefits do people have, etc. And like despite of 30 years of independency, Ukraine never reached its economic production of the late 80s and starting of the 90s. So basically in 30 years, there was no real development for level of the quality of life. And we also have to keep in mind that like in a capitalistic Ukraine, the spread between rich and poor is much bigger. So the country even in itself produces less than it did before the 90s, and now this little which it does produce is also spread a lot not equally between people, so the normal person lives on a much worse conditions, and this obviously doesn't allow for like real freedom of thought or freedom of culture, because you have to fight every day for your basic existence.
So you all would say that things are worse since the collapse of the Soviet Union and the establishment of Ukrainian independence.
Nowadays, Ukraine is the most hungry country in Europe. It's
So yeah, like
data from the United Nations. It's not our idea or something. No, it's data from the United Nations. The Ukraine is the most hungry country in Europe, and I think that it's awful. It's awful that so many people still believe that everything is so good. People just they feel what happens, but they don't want to understand what happens. They don't want to agree that what's going on it's real or that it's fault of our government, our capitalists. They see everything just like problems of our Soviet heritage or problems of Russia invasion. They just don't understand that most of the problems that modern Ukraine has was made by Ukrainian capitalist class, not someone else.
One thing that's really kind of been propagated since the end of the Soviet Union, and you have Ukrainian diaspora across the West. And so many of these leading figures within that are like members of the Ukrainian nationalist organization, right? Promoting the idea of the Holodomor. So I didn't know how you interpreted that. Do you think the concept of the Holodomor is legitimate, or is this just propaganda?
Oh,
Of
yeah,
course,
okay.
this
So
concept is
I,
a propaganda. Of course, this concept is it was just a way to discredit Soviet Union because what can be worse than genocide of some nation. But in fact, in those years, there was hunger in Poland, which was not Soviet. There was hunger in America too. There are no any kind of statistic, but I've seen some newspaper from that times, from America, I mean, that when there was Great Depression, there were hunger deaths. It's the first thing. And the second thing is that so-called Holodomor was ended by the help from Soviet government. They gave to Ukraine a lot of grain, a lot of trucks for agriculture, and I can find documents if you need them. There are no any evidence that the famine was like a plan for someone. No document at all. Any document that can prove that it was a plan to make the famine, uh, they don't exist. I don't know how you can make genocide on state level without any kind of documents. I just don't know how you can do it. So, of course, there was famine. Of course, many people died, and it was terrible. It was a big mistake of Soviet economists, a big mistake of planning. Also, there were objective factors because the climate was not very good this year. It was a problems of I don't know how to say it in English. Uh, kulaks kind of
the rich people on the
the rich
villages.
people is just a special term in Russian and Ukrainian language for this word. Rich people in villages, rich peasants. So there are many factors, but anyway, we can say that it was a planned famine. It was not a planned famine. It was not something like in Ireland or in India, for example. No documents, just no documents, and everything is based on someone's stories, someone's thoughts, someone's memoirs, and etc. No documents about planning this famine.
Max, if you would allow, I would like to add a few words. Yeah. Okay. So to sum it up, overall, it is a tragedy of those years. A lot of people have died, but we have to stick more to the facts and, as Max mentioned, not some stories of individuals. And we know that there was not only a bad year for crops. It wasn't not only in the Soviet Union, it was across the world. It was not only the thing of like shortage of food. It was also a thing of having some pandemic during these years as well. And we also know that the numbers which are used for this like the total death toll, they are based on either bad statistics or completely falsified statistics, and that's just the argument that like a lot of people have that, and it's a tragedy. But we have no like real evidence that it was a planned action against specifically Ukrainian people. It was more of a general tragedy. And we can also see a reaction of people in Ukraine on this famine because like it's easy to be judgeful now, but if we go back into the 40s, during like the Second World War, one would imagine that if the Soviet government was such awful, and we would to trust all the individual stories where parents would have to eat their own children because they were so hungry, those parents or whoever, they would be quite pissed about all the stories, and they would be joining the National Forces for Liberation, known as OUN-UPA, to fight the Soviets for their freedom. Because if the stories were to be true, it would mean that it's a good case to fight for your freedom, because you have literally eaten your children like 5 years ago, and now you have an army of Ukrainian nationals who are saying we will fight this back. Yet, if you look at numbers of the Ukrainian nationalist army, it never went above 30,000 active soldiers, which is very low, because if you look at the Ukrainian partisan numbers during the Second World War, it was much bigger, and this including millions and millions of Ukrainians serving in the legal Red Army. So if we look at the support of people of Ukraine during the Second World War, one would assume that if it was so bad, they wouldn't be so supportive of the Soviet government, which they were. So we can also like judge the situation based on those kind of things. Thank you.
Yeah, can I say something else, Tony? I have
Uh,
forgot to tell that the famine was not only in Ukraine, but it was only in other republics of the Soviet Union, such as Russia and Kazakhstan. So not only Ukrainians died. They just want to make it look like only Ukrainian tragedy, but it's just nationalism. A lot of people from different republics were dying from famine, sadly.
There's a question in chat, direct follow-up. I would read it out. Would you say that one of the reasons for the famine in Ukraine in the 30s was the mistakes made by Soviet planners? The answer. It was a mistake. We are to blame the planners as well, but like it's always a bad idea to blame only one group of people or a single person, because it's a complex situation where a lot of factors came in. So we had a pandemic which hit a lot of people, and now many people wouldn't die from famine alone, but since their health was so weakened by not eating enough, you're dying easier to health issues. And we also have to include such factors as why would Soviet Union have to sell crops in the first place? Because Soviet Union is quite a rich country on other things such as gold. which could have been sold instead. And the politics of the time didn't allow Soviet Union to sell it in that masses it could have, because Soviet Union was in economic blockade. Thank you.
But in a way, the grain was sold, but not that much. The volume of sales was much lower in the 32nd and 33rd years. The volume of export of grain, it has become 5 times less, as far as I remember. We have made an article about this 1 or 2 years ago, maybe 2, yeah, 2 years ago, and we can send you an article with our view about the famine of the 32 and 30s. You can read it with translator, maybe Google, maybe DeepL, I don't know. And this article, there's a fundamental overview about so-called Holodomor. So I will use my opportunity to recommend it.
Maybe a final thing from me. There was an American in the Soviet Union at the time, a guy named Walter Duranty, who also received some Putler Grammy. Not sure I'm calling it correctly, but it's like the highest award amongst journalists. He worked for the New York Times, and he was actually fighting this propaganda, which already began in the 30s, of this genocide. And he was describing the situation for Americans in the New York Times, which is likely also positively affected the American point of view during the Second World War, and why USA then also agreed for Lend-Lease to the Soviet Union. So yeah, that's also like an American guy who was there back in the days fighting this kind of propaganda.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a lot of that narrative of genocide against Ukrainians, like consciously enacted by the Soviet Union, has been propagated by the OUN diaspora, which is ironic in a way, right? Because OUN was responsible for ethnic cleansing against Poles and various other groups in the 40s and whatnot, and allying with the Nazis. And you can also just look at the fact that throughout the Soviet Union's history, there have been Ukrainians assuming leadership positions within the Soviet Union, as well as, in the 30s, the promotion of like Ukrainian language and education for Ukrainians, promoting like self-determination amongst Ukrainians. So it just seems sort of very contradictory that the idea that there would be a conscious like ethnic cleansing of Ukrainians by the Soviet Union while also promoting Ukrainian self-determination in the same time period. So yeah, I don't know if you had any further comments on that or. If not, we have some other questions here. Mary was asking, why is the RFU having to work underground?
Yep, so we have to work from the underground because everything affiliated to communism is officially banned on the legal level in Ukraine. So you cannot have anything of the symbols. You cannot citate like Lenin, God forbid Stalin or whoever. You cannot really represent like our version of history. No matter how much of sources, books, historians actually stand behind it, it's legally forbidden. And yeah, so especially during the war, like it has gotten even worse, so that even non-leftists, so even like the opposition, the bourgeois opposition, has fallen to the repressions. So like under those conditions, the only way to continue working is from the underground.
I have something to add. So, while working underground, I have a concrete example of speaking why. There was a man called Chimeris. It's his second name. And he was telling about repressions in Ukraine, about political repressions against left activists. There was his channel in Telegram in the 2022 year, and he was punished for speaking about the repressions. He was punished, so his ribs were broken by the officials, and he could get to prison, but he is very old and he has cancer, so this is the only reason why he is still free. But as far as I said, officials have broke his ribs for speaking the truth about the repressions, because there is a narrative about Ukraine being a democratic country. It's so liberate, it's so good, it's so cool. Anyone can speak anything, just not like in Russia. It's official narrative of Ukrainian propaganda. But in fact, if you speak about repressions, Chimeras was speaking about repressions openly. If you speak about it, you can get your ribs broken. So it's just dangerous to say what you think if it's not something that our government will like. Stories about Ukrainian democracy, they are just lies. They are just fairy tales. You can speak whatever you want until you will speak something that authorities don't want you to speak.
Thanks, Max. We have a question from Bizwadip. He wanted to know what your all's opinion are about the CPRF and the CPU.
CPRF, you mean Communist Party of the Russian Federation?
Yes.
The Communist the Communist Party of Russian Federation. Well, what can I say about it? Everyone in Russia, from even the 19th, knew that this party is opportunist. This party is it has nothing common with communist ideas. This party claims to be kind of orthodox communist, but it means orthodox like religion, orthodox like a form of Christianity. So the head of the Communist Party, Zyuganov, he is Orthodox communist. He is always visiting church. He's telling a lot about God and etc. And no one in this party looks like no one thinks that it's something bad. Also, the head of the KPRF, Zyuganov, he has his business, so he is in fact an oligarch, not a big oligarch, but he is. The conditions in his business for workers another good. So I don't really know, even before the war has started in Russia and in other ex-Soviet countries, everyone understood that KPRF is just something that's called it communist, but it's not it in fact. Just only a hammer and a sickle and nothing else. There is more nationalism in their ideas than communism, much more nationalism. And as far as I said, it was even before the war has started. Even before the war, no one in Russia thought that CPRF is the Communist Party. Just maybe for the people who are not in Russia or other countries from ex-USSR, it's not that obvious. Maybe because of language and etc. Some else issues. But just even social chauvinists in Russia, not all of them like CPRF because even for them CPRF is crazy.
Thanks, Max. Next question we had was from Manny, and he wonders, what is your assessment of the international communist movement and the organizations in your country?
Well, the left movement is obviously in scrambles after the fall of the Soviet Union, as there is no real strong communist power. Of course, some may think of China, but at the RFU, we do not consider China or China Communist Party really communist. Our best guess for a communist party would be the Greek Communist Party, which is also pretty strong in Greece. So overall, the movement has seen better days, but we also are seeing and recognizing that we are winning in followers for our movement. So the work isn't going into the void. We are actually getting more and more support for the people. This is true for the world, but it's also true for the Ukraine, as we are basically, we just started like 3 years ago, and our movement has been growing ever since, despite all the bans, despite all the need for secrecy, all the need to work from the underground. So yeah, it's not in the best state, but there are very good perspectives. Thank you.
Also, we didn't talk about CPU, the Communist Party of Ukraine. I told only about Communist Party of Russian Federation. Communist Party of Ukraine, it has a difficult story because before Maidan, in the maybe from the 2000s to 2010, Communist Party of Ukraine, it was just a party with people who had really different ideas. There was some true Marxists who really tried to do something for communist movement in Ukraine. There were some not communists at all who didn't even call themselves communists. They were just people, well, I would say that leftists or any colors, any ideas. And the situation, it was going on for many years. Communist Party of Ukraine was not really communists, it was a mix of different ideas. And at one moment, here comes Maidan, here comes the cup of 2013 and 2014 years. And what Communist Party of Ukraine did, it decided to support Yanukovych government. So Yanukovych and his supporters, they didn't hold power in Ukraine. Maidan was successful, and in the end, the Communist Party of Ukraine was crushed by reparations, by authorities, and now they're mostly inactive. Now, Communist Party of Ukraine, it's not a part of Ukrainian communist movement, but it's a part of Russian communist movement, because the leaders of this party nowadays, they live in Russia, and they they're just like department of CPRF, of the Communist Party of Russian Federation. Maybe we can discuss what they did when we'll speak more about Maidan. Or we can discuss it now, as you wish.
Well, to sort of play off of that, Mark was asking if you could talk about other groups on the left in Ukraine and Russia. Who do you all feel are the most consequential? Whether they're, Maoists, Trotskyists, Marxist-Leninists, anarchists, if any are worth mentioning.
Okay, so speak about, you mean what is nowadays in 20?
Yes, currently.
Yeah. Nowadays, communist movement in Ukraine is very, 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 very small. Communist movement in Ukraine, it's just, I don't know if we can call it movement. There are some groups, such as we, such as some else, but most of the groups are so small, just I don't know even if we have to mention them. There are some Trotskyists who support Ukrainians this war because they think that Ukraine is fighting against Russian aggressor, against Russian imperialists. There are some ex-CPU members who support Russia. There are some other groups, but in fact, there we, the Workers' Front in Ukraine, and we are the biggest communist organization in Ukraine, sadly. Why sadly? Because we are not a big organization at all. We are a small organization, but we are the biggest in Ukraine. Also, there is a Union of Communists of Ukraine, another organization who also stands on internationalist positions about this war. But really, there is not much to speak about if we want to speak about communist mode in Ukraine nowadays. After Maidan, anarchists and social democrats, they had an opportunity to do a lot because communist movement was crushed totally. But well, even if we speak not about communist movement, but about left movement generally in a very wide sense, left movement in Ukraine is very small, just really very small. Most of Ukrainian people who are interested in politics, they are nationalists or liberals. There are not much leftists.
Thanks for that answer, Max. Mary was saying that she believes it appears you are saying Ukraine should stop defending itself and rejoin the Russian Empire. Do you feel that's true or accurate of your position?
Of course, this is not our position. Of course, this is the position of maybe some ex-CPU members, but not our position. Our position is a war against the war. Our position is no war, but class war. We think that this war, the war of Ukrainian and Russian capitalists and also Western capitalists and also Chinese capitalists. This war is not the war that Ukrainian proletarians are interested in. Ukrainian proletarians they gain nothing from this war. Russian proletarians gain nothing too. No one gains nothing. Uh, Everyone suffers except the rich man, except capitalists. And this is the reason why our position is to fight against our government, to fight against imperialism, to fight against any wars but class wars. Our goal is a proletarian state, not a Ukrainian bourgeois state that will win and will have the same problems it had before the war, such as corruption, such as famine, because famine it's not something only about Soviet Union, but it's about nowadays too exploitation of the workers and etc. If Ukrainian capitalists will win in this war, they will win, not we. It will be their win. If Russian capitalists win, it will be also only their win, not our win. The only smart thing that the working class can do is to fight against its government for liberation, for the dictatorship of proletariat.
Yeah, it seems, from over here in the US, right? There's the way it's portrayed in corporate media is that there's only two sides in this conflict, right? You're either pro-Russian or pro-Ukraine. And even amongst leftists, like it's presented as, what's going on in Ukraine is a war of national liberation. And then you have the other side, many who identify as Marxist-Leninists will say that, Russia's invasion of Ukraine was justified because they're being encroached upon their borders by NATO. And, for us as the Virginia worker and others in our orbit, we would say that this is an inter-imperialist war and that the working class or proletarian position is one of revolutionary defeatism, where we're not siding with one ruling class against another, whether it's Ukraine capitalists or Russian capitalists or NATO capitalists, but rather it's our job to establish working class states or proletarian states, as you said, or worker states. And it just, it feels like we are essentially erased from the narrative on this because, again, we're not corporate media. We don't have the ability to put forward one position or the other. And so we fall into this false binary of having to choose one capitalist national force versus another. And I mean that this was one of the reasons why we were so enthusiastic about reaching out to RFU and the work you all are doing is because you're one of the only Ukrainian forces that we know who are actually on the ground there saying, we don't support capitalists of Ukraine or Russia or NATO, and trying to carve that space out and say that there is another alternative, there is another option or another line to put forward. And it doesn't mean we have to tail as workers, the global working class, choosing between one set of capitalists versus another.
I would like to start my speech from condemning all leftists who are choosing one of the capitalistic sides, because it's pretty much there's a lot of kind of argumentations people can try to find out, but finally it's all about it comes down to the issue of the Second International, where Lenin was fighting Kautsky in Europe, and we can try to find a more progressive capitalist, a more democratic capitalist, but it won't help us with the cause. We will simply continue seeing wars breaking out, people dying, and a few profiting from it. Those few profiting from it are still on both sides, on the Ukraine sides and on the Russian side, not even mentioning the profits for more Western countries. And when I say it, I am referring to Russia's, of course, some of the Russian capitalists have suffered losses, but there have been a lot of Russian capitalists who actually had some really good income, positive income margins in the past year. And in Ukraine, despite telling the Western countries, oh, you shouldn't trade with Russia, you should impose sanctions, etc., etc., in fact, it has become public knowledge that in August, it has become public knowledge that a state firm of Ukraine has been trading aluminum and titanium to Russia. So basically, resources which Russia then uses to build war planes, war jets. So even the Ukrainian government is selling those rare resources to Russia. And at the same time, Ukraine is also profiting from exporting Russia's gas through Ukraine into Europe. So the capitalists are continuing gathering the profits, while normal citizens, usually the poorer ones, are hit by the war the most. They have to give their lives, they lose their property, their families, their family members. And we are extremely against any kind of solidarity with either of the capitalistic states. As you said, we also we agree with you on the position that it is an imperialistic war on both sides, and we don't like the idea of searching of a more progressive imperialist state as it was basically proven to be a wrong direction by Lenin about 100 years ago, and it would be really sad to make the same mistakes all over again. Max, do you have anything to add?
Well, no, any kind of state, I mean, any kind of capitalistic state nowadays, it can be progressive. Nowadays, capitalistic states, if they are in late stage of capitalism, I mean imperialism, there is just no further development. Imperialism is the end. It's just there's nothing to. There's nowhere to go somewhere else when you get imperialism, when you get late stage capitalism. There's no development at all. When there's imperialism, there can be nothing progressive but socialism. It's everything that capitalism can give us.
Thank you all for that answer. We have Tyler asking, do you support calls for a ceasefire, such as the kind that China has offered to broker? What do you believe the U.S. left should be calling for?
Overall, it's not a bad thing to have a ceasefire, because obviously if we do get a ceasefire, people would stop dying, or would stop, they would die less. However, it's an illusion to believe that China or whoever could negotiate such a peace which would bring peace and prosperity for any meaningful long term, as both sides are extremely invested into this situation, and this peace won't be a long-lasting one. So what we should really be working on is how to change the capitalistic nature of our countries, while it can come as a positive if we get some kind of peace. However, it shouldn't be our personal focus, because our personal focus should be on achieving an actual state where we would prevent any future wars. And in regards of what we would want Americans to do, of course, going out and saying, yeah, let's not ship weapons because weapons are bad, they are just prolonging the war, is something which one can do. However, we also see a possible issue there that this may look too close to the narrative of the Republicans in the US, which would basically mean for a lot of people, okay, why would I go for like this leftist agenda when I can go with the Republicans if I support similar ideas? So maybe our wish for the Americans would be that you would actually expose the American agenda in this war, being getting all the nice resources Ukraine has. And this could be done, for example, in terms of supporting that US can be involved, but in terms of humanitarian aid, and US shouldn't be making plans. US companies shouldn't be making plans on buying out Ukrainian industry, Ukrainian resources, Ukrainian resource deposits for cheap, because obviously during the war everything the economy is collapsing, and buying all of this from the outside is going to be extremely lucrative. So to expose this, Americans could tell, okay, we can help Ukrainian because it's a humanitarian disaster. However, we do not want our companies to buy stuff out. Of course, Ukraine could use some money to rebuild the infrastructure, etc., etc. But Americans, if they are so good willing, shouldn't be doing it for their own profit, but could do it as a donation. And okay, in America, one could scream out, oh, but that's something what a socialist would say. But I hope that's not an issue with a Virginia worker, as I think you're okay being called out as a socialist. So that's kind of thing which could be a positive for us. Max, do you have anything to add?
No, I have not thought.
Thank you all for that. Mary was asking, sort of directed at us as the Virginia worker, mentioning other options beyond, either siding with Ukraine or Russia, and asking like, speaking to what those options are, and that it's not clear what the goals are. Instead, comes across as seemingly bashing Ukraine and or supporting Russia propaganda / denying history. So I just want to respond to Mary and say, when we say that there's another option, we would say that that is the independent working class option, the proletarian internationalist option, where we side with the working class of Ukraine as well as the working class of Russia, right? Where we don't conflate our interest as the global working class, whether in the United States, Ukraine, Russia, NATO, the European Union, with the interests of the capitalists or the ruling classes of our states or countries, recognizing that, that the working class in all of these nations has no state power, right? The Soviet Union collapsed. However, you want to analyze the Soviet Union as being a degenerated worker state or what have you. We would say that we are putting forward the working class of the world has no national boundaries or borders, that our interests are with one another across these artificial borders, and that we need to establish working class states in our countries. And to sort of play off this idea of what can Americans do, for instance, right, in the United States, I believe it's around 3% of our national economy is based around quote unquote the defense industry, which means producing the missiles, the ammunition, the armored vehicles, everything that Biden in our country is subsidizing, spending tens of billions to then ship off to Ukraine to fight Russia, right? That in a way, it's sort of like Keynesianism, right? Like, we are subsidizing this war that's happening over in Ukraine, and granted, it's like helping provide jobs and income for workers here who are in the defense industry, but at the same time, like workers who are working at these munition plants, these factories that are producing the weapons, should understand that their jobs are dependent upon global war. When war is happening across the world, these companies are benefiting. Where we're at, we have this thing called the Radford Army Ammunition Plant, which has been in operation since World War II. Anytime there has been a war, whether it was Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, and including in Ukraine, business is good for this company. And it's actually run now through a multinational, BAE Systems, which is based out of Britain, is the one managing the site where we are producing munitions. And so, I think that just speaks to how messed up the priorities are, that when there are wars continuously developing, these multinational quote unquote defense companies, corporations, really war corporations, are making massive profits, yet it's harming regular working class people in Ukraine. They're the ones who are having to fight on the front lines. They're the ones who are being shelled, who are being exposed to the toxic chemicals there on the front lines. But also, even here, the workers who are producing this stuff are exposed to heavy metals. My father has a rare disease that only comes from exposure to the heavy metals produced at these munition sites. And, it has a devastating effect on my family personally, because my dad now is disabled. He can't speak, he can't walk, he struggles to even swallow food, to the point that it causes him to develop pneumonia. And people with this disease end up succumbing to it because they can no longer function, and die from it. So it's harming working class people here, even though it provides jobs and a source of income. But in the long term, it is harming our local communities of working class people, on top of harming the working class communities across the globe who are dealing with this on the front lines of being shelled, being bombed. There's a reason why the U.S. Army is the largest polluter in the world, and it has to deal with these very harmful substances being used to kill and maim people. Meanwhile, the CEOs of these corporations are making profit, right? So we think that there are better answers, better alternatives than just saying, Ukraine is engaging in a war of national liberation. This was the same argument used in the Operation Iraqi Freedom, right? We were always told since the beginning of the 21st century that what was happening was a way to liberate people, whether it was in Afghanistan, Iraq, and now Ukraine. And we can just look historically, none of these countries have ever been better off because of U.S. involvement in providing munitions to these countries. So that's my position, and why, we would say in the Virginia Worker, we want the working class to see state power, all power to the workers, both in the United States and Ukraine, Russia, all over the world,
Sorry, I missed the question. So yeah, of course it's all bad, but what was the actual question?
Yeah, Mary's question was directed towards us, just about, what is this alternative beyond either supporting Ukraine or Russia, trying to promote the idea of proletarian internationalism, and what that means on a domestic level in terms of establishing like a worker state.
Okay, so basically the topic of national liberation and protecting it. The idea of national liberation is a lot of it is flawed in terms of how we actually live it in the current world, because national liberation is used as something it is something positive. However, the question is who is benefiting in the end from all the slaughter of all the manslaughter going on. And in our opinion, an actual liberation would come from people being free to do in their lives what they want, to be free of being afraid that they will lose their job, they will lose their home, they will become homeless, that they will die of illnesses, that they won't be able to feed their children. And none of this is going to be achieved for the Ukrainians, even if we get a complete victory over the Russian invasion. None of those achievements will be available to a regular Ukrainian citizen. So in case of the victory for the Ukraine, since we're Ukrainians, let's talk from this perspective. What we are going to achieve is we'll get not even we. It will be more about the Ukrainian capitalist along with the Western capitalist gaining access to the resources in the Ukraine, in the eastern parts of it. We will see also kind of forced Ukrainian culture in the eastern regions, which have been diverting from the Ukrainian culture for quite a long time now. But for like a Ukraine living in Kiev, or for Ukraine living in Lviv, or for Ukraine living in Odessa, it will be just something like to tell, oh yeah, our like borders have been defended, but you're not getting any actual value of it. Your culture is not growing out of it. Your economy is not growing out of it. Well, not for you at the very least. You're going to have the same miserable life as it was before, and in this way, we are also following like the actual solution to it is an international worker movement where we achieve a liberation on a completely different level. That's from me.
Thank you for that answer. We have Manny asking, would you agree that American communists could advance a call to workers at the munition plants to strike?
Of course.
Short answer, yeah.
If the ammunition will be for us, it's okay. If for capitalists, it's not okay.
Yeah, maybe a few more words on it. So overall, as we said, we see no value in supporting any capitalistic side because it only leads to death among the working class, but to zero progress for the working class. So if the capitalistic government gets more munitions, it means prolonged war. It means more people dead on both sides, because we are not happy about Russians dying, no matter civilians or soldiers, whoever. It's their people and they are dying. That's bad. And there's literally zero value for a regular citizen, no matter of what country we are talking about.
Thank you for that. Yeah, Mary was saying that she thinks we have seen the Russians trying to grab resources from Ukraine, Africa, the Middle East, etc. recently, especially via Wagner. I guess, I mean, I wouldn't see a contradiction in what you all are saying versus what she's saying here, because it seems like you both acknowledge that Russia is an imperialist power, correct?
Yeah, it's an imperialist state. But on that term, Ukraine is also an imperialist state, just a weaker one, because we have a lot of oppression of the minorities such as Roma and Sinti. Also, there are some oppressions of the really tiny minorities in the west of Ukraine. And obviously, part of the conflict is a cultural conflict, and Ukrainian government is not like producing some extremely good cultural films, books, theater pieces to sway the Russian culture affiliated part of the population, but it's more of using the long stick to force Ukrainian culture on top of people who, for one or the other reason, already have fallen under the influence of Russian culture. So overall, it's like imperialist here, imperialist there, and we condemn all kind of conflicts caused by it.
I don't know, being an imperial state doesn't mean some kind of invasionist politics. It means the economical basis level of development of capitalism. So in Ukraine, there's a financial capital, monopolies, and etc. It feels okay. Just it feels okay, and it's the first thing. The second thing is that Ukraine, yes, Daniel said right, it's not an egalitarian state or something else. Even some bourgeois democratic things, they don't work in Ukraine. Even bourgeois rights, bourgeois freedoms, no. And well, in Ukraine also, we have to admit that Ukraine is not an independent state nowadays. Sadly, but it is not. If you will look at deals that Ukrainian government and the International Monetary Fund, if I translate it right to English, the deals they're absolutely just, I would say, colonial. Ukraine economics, Ukraine monetary policy, Ukraine laws, they are being controlled by foreign influence, foreign capital. First of all, Ukrainian state is servant to the interests of foreign capitalists. Ukrainian state is just ready to do anything to get another loan. So, well, I can't say that there's no imperialism in Ukraine or something. And while Russia is imperialist, no, of course, well, first of all, imperialism is a global system of capitalism. It's not something that can exist only in one country. Of course, Ukraine is imperialist too. Even if it sounds strange, if you think that imperialism is about being angry and evil. No, imperialism is reached.
Thanks, Max. I have a question from Tyler. He was asking, in terms of this idea of, unipolar world versus a multipolar world, he was wondering, do you see multipolarity as advantageous for the international working class struggle or not necessary?
Max, I would like to ask you to answer this first, and maybe I will add.
Okay. Multipolarity, it's absolutely bourgeois concept. It's just an idea of weaker capitalists that they much reach more in this world than the strongest ones. Multiple reality is just I don't know what to speak about it. It's just a really strange concept for communists, for a man who calls him communist. Multiple reality is just one of the views how to divide the world between strong capitalist countries. It has nothing about liberation of proletarians, about socialist revolution. Multiple reality is just one of bourgeois views how to divide the profits, how to divide the world. What can I say else?
Maybe we'll add that the multipolarity is also something which we'll pretty much see across all the capitalistic history, and it will go on. So even if we achieve a state where one power arises to be a dominant power, such as, for example, USA was for 20, 30 years after the Soviet has fallen, it will just grow for itself a new multipolar enemy. Overall, we can look for weaknesses in the capitalistic system. We should look for them. Like wars, for example, are also a destabilizing factor because wars do waken people up, wars do weaken the status quo, but it's still not something we as communists would be happy about. It's not like we are happy that there is a war and now the state is destabilized and gives us an opportunity. Of course, it's a bad thing. But in any situation, we should be looking for those weaknesses in the capitalistic system. Thank you.
Thanks. We had a question from Abdel. He's wondering, what is your view of the World Anti-Imperialist Platform and the polemics they have had with the PCM and KKE?
Max, I would kindly ask you to answer.
Okay. Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I guess they're wondering. I think it speaks to the division that's happening in the Marxist-Leninist movement globally about either being pro-Russia or recognizing Russia as an imperialist state. I'm not familiar with the position put forward by the PCM. I do know that the KKE has come out as critical against Russia and considering it a capitalist or imperialist state. So Abdel was wondering what y'all's view was about the World Anti-Imperialist Platform.
Okay, so as for us, we agree with ideas of Communist Party of Greece, KKE. But sorry, just I didn't get the question. I want to find it in chat.
It's from Abdul at 2319.
Okay.
Like I said, I think it's
So,
speaking to that
what
division in Marxist-Leninism on an
was
international level.
best platform and the polemics? Well, of course, our views are pro KKE. Of course, when I speak about the world anti-imperialist platform via our internationalist side, we, we don't support the meetings that there was with pro-Russian countries in Cuba, as far as I remember. So, yeah, we are on the side of Communist Party of Greece, Communist Party of Turkey, Communist Party of Spain. We are on the side of internationalist Marxism. All in all, we are on the side of the third international, not the second one or the fourth one.
Thanks for clarifying that. Biz what it was wondering, or I guess they were stating they didn't understand how Ukraine can be considered an imperialist state, especially when we consider that Ukraine is not an independent state.
Imperialism is a stage of capitalism. Imperialism means late stage of capitalism, first of all. So it means development of monopolies, development of financial capital, which means the union of bank and I don't know the right term in English, industry capital maybe. So in Ukraine, we see monopolies, we see financial capital, we see the other sides of imperialism, such as, for example, export of capital. In Ukraine, we see all the signs of imperialism that have been described by Lenin in his book Imperialism as the highest stage of capitalism. So yes, Ukraine is an imperial state.
Maybe
Just it
that
has
conception.
a weak, just it has a weak place in imperialist pyramid, but it is still an imperial state. All in all, Ukraine being weak doesn't mean that Ukraine is not imperialist. Imperialism is not about weakness or strongness.
Is what it was sort of like building off of that and saying that they thought Lenin was differentiating between imperialist countries and oppressed countries.
Yeah, but the thing, or Max, do you want to? Okay.
If you want to answer, do it.
Okay, sure. The thing is that when Lenin was writing his work, we had capitalism not as developed as we have it today. So at his time, there were a lot of countries who were not like even at the capitalistic state. Even the Russian Empire, it hasn't reached the like full potential of capitalism, as it was still having a lot of feudal systems in place. And there are maybe also some of the viewers or people in chat are have a misconception of what imperialism is. Imperialism is not about just calling yourself an empire, such as the Russian Empire did, or it's also not about just being a big country, even though Ukraine is actually pretty big, because Ukraine was a big state and also gained a lot of territories after the Second World War. So even on the matter of the size, and Ukraine can be seen as such, but overall we are not talking about those kind of parameters. We are sticking to the Lenin definition, and in terms of capitalism, Ukraine has developed past this stage, and as Max explained, we have monopolization of industry. You must have heard about oligarchs. It's like a fancy word people often use about Ukrainian bilk bourgeois, because difference between an oligarch and just a rich person is that an oligarch has also influence in terms of owning some kind of newspaper or TV channel. So he's not just a rich person, he is a rich person who actually completely owns a huge propaganda channel. So those are kind of people who are in control of those stuff. We have a lot of oligarchs, and in these terms, Ukraine shows a lot of signs of imperialism. Of course, it may be somewhat dependent on Western countries, or in many terms it may be dependent on Western countries. But if we are now trying to find out who is more dependent, who is more oppressed, we could use this argument to show Russia as a dependent state, because Russia is dependent a lot on Europe and China, because Russia is not using all the resources it's mining, it's selling those resources. Russia is basically a resource colony for Europe, and now it's trying to switch to be a resource colony for China. But we are not going to call Russia not an imperialist state simply because its economy is a weaker one, simply because it's a smaller player. There is always like a bigger player, but it doesn't mean that there can be only one imperialist. Imperialist state is defined by what's the actual state of industry monopolization and how did it grow together, or if it did grow together with the banking capital. Thank you.
Thank you for that answer. One question I had was, if you look at, especially in the West, there seems to have been more organized force in making sure there was like a Ukrainian nationalist position adopted and advocated in Western media. And I think you can sort of see that and say, look at like Canada, right? Like they've established the Victims of Communism Memorial, right? And it appears that the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, who have a very strong presence in Canada as part of the Ukrainian diaspora, have had in that, to the point that this memorial has even listed people, prominent leaders in the OUN as people as heroes, right? To celebrate someone like Roman Shoyukev, is that how you say his name? Even though that they were responsible for ethnic cleansing against like Poles and whatnot. So I guess I'm wondering, like, how much of a role do you see as anti-communism playing in propping up, like this idea of like Ukrainian nationalism in the West?
Well, it's a great issue that Ukrainian nationalists or nationalists at all are being praised by Western or anyone in general, and but it's something which could have been seen actually directly after the defeat of the Nazi Germany, as there have been many Germans who stayed in the Western Germany. And they actually didn't. They were like strong. They had strong positions in the Nazi Germany, and they stayed in the Western freed Germany, and they still could remain in their high seats and basically continue more or less to have extreme influence in the Western Germany. So seeing some of the Ukrainian nationalists be praised is not surprising, but it's obviously an issue. And overall, we know like examples of those nationalists being praised. We know about examples where people who are written into those people who died due to communism or whatever, despite not being so because they died somewhere else. And yeah, I may have lost the question. Could you repeat it once again, please?
I guess just speaking to the success of Ukrainian nationalists who were like Nazi collaborators in not only being accepted into the West, right, as diaspora, but then also propagating the narrative that seems to be very steeped in anti-communism and the Cold War and trying to refute the Soviet Union in every possible way, even to the point of excusing, Nazi or Nazi collaborator atrocities that were engaging in ethnic cleansing. Yeah, definitely any comment on that.
Yeah, okay. So there is an obvious conflict of interest because those people are useful for the capitalist states, as now those people are against anything, not only Soviet Union, they're against communism in general, and those are decent groups of people who can be used as martyrs, or if they survived and just went to the US or Canada as diaspora, who can spread this anti-communism ideas. But yeah, it's a huge problem, and in Ukraine we have seen that like those people are also kind of heroes in Ukraine because they are fighting the bad Soviet Union. But there's also like a conflict because many of the OUN members, the Ukrainian nationalists, were cleansing entire Polish villages, so killing like hundreds of people in a single go. And but since this would bring some of the conflicts between Ukraine and Poland up, which is not optimal for now, people are rather, or not people, but like the propaganda is trying to just ignore those facts and like still call them heroes. So it's just a propaganda game where you try to forget about the bad things, or from time to time maybe blame some of the atrocities on the Soviet Union, but mostly just try not to talk about them. Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you all taking the time to answer all these questions. Some more friendly than others, and I think it's good to have folks who are of differing views and believe that the truth will come through regardless of political identity and whatnot. And so if there aren't any other questions from attendees of this meeting, I just want to close this out, and maybe you all can tell folks how to contact you if they have further questions or comments.
Max, could you give a contact?
Hey, yeah, I will write in the chat. We have our Telegram. You can write there. You can write to us there, and you can write us through our email. So here's our Telegram feedback bot, and I need 1 second. I'll write our email. So
While we
here,
are waiting, we actually. Sorry, Max,
and
continue.
you can write your questions through our feedback bot and through our email if you have them.
Yeah, and we actually had a comrade on our side who would like to hear your opinion, if there is such, on the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. It's an American organization. Do you have anything which you could share with us about it? It doesn't have to be now. You can also write it to us. But that's what our comrade was looking for to hear from you. Thank you.
Yeah, in terms of Frizzo, as a lot of people refer to them over here, sort of had the impression they were kind of pro-Russian. Some people use the term tanky to refer to them. I don't know if they view China as a imperialist power. I think they're sympathetic to China. That's sort of my general impression. Know some folks involved in that group, not too deep. Unfortunately, I feel like the for Americans who identify as Marxist-Leninists generally tend to be pro-Russian. We do have members who are in the Communist Workers Platform, I think, in this chat, and I think they are more aligned with RFU here. So, yeah, if you all want to check out the Communist Workers Platform, then, like I said, those folks, Manny here in particular, I think are again like closer to y'all's position as RFU, as anti-revisionist Marxist-Leninists. But unfortunately, it does seem, speaking on this division in the international Marxist-Leninist movement in America, the tendency seems to sway more towards like apologia for Russia, seeing China as a socialist state, not as an imperialist state. It seems like a lot of groups that identify as Maoists would say that China is social imperialist or imperialist, and maybe Trotskyist groups would say China is, I don't know, a degenerated worker state or just imperialist. So it's kind of, I would say, abysmal for the U.S. left in this position, because it does tend to fall into this false binary of saying for the left that they're either pro-Ukraine and thinking this is a war of national liberation, supporting the Zelensky regime and the supporting of the U.S. providing arms and funding to Ukraine, or being pro-Russian. That it seems those are the general trends. Mary, RFU is the Workers' Front of Ukraine, or Revolutionary Workers' Front of Ukraine. These are the folks who are presenting today.
Thanks for answering also my question. That's all on our side.
Well, thank you all again for taking the time to do this. I know we're on different time zones, and you all are operating in much more difficult situations than we are here in the US. We still have labor rights and the right to organize. Granted, they're very controlled or regulated in terms of what rights we have. There has been a general uptick in labor militancy in this country. We have the auto workers on strike right now. There's the Screen Actors Guild. There's the Writers Guild on strike. Teamsters settled a contract with UPS. So it seems like labor activity is heating up here, which I think is generally good. But then we have a lot of issues with the labor bureaucracy and trying to contain that. But yeah, we want to support what you all are doing as much as possible. We support this line of revolutionary defeatism. We don't support any capitalist regime, whether in Ukraine, Russia, or NATO. And hopefully we'll be in touch. There had been talks further about within our network of how do we amplify y'all's voice, and maybe even trying to build out some sort of a network that can provide a larger audience for this revolutionary defeatist line in Ukraine. So hopefully we can follow up on that with you all, and counteracting those two dominant narratives of one capitalist state versus another.
Yeah, it was a great time with you. Maybe one tiny topic, even though it wasn't asked about, but simply because like this worker movement in the US is actually inspiring that US workers are actually getting stuff done. It would be important to highlight how are the current rights of the Ukrainian workers, because overall Ukrainian workers were benefiting from a very progressive very progressive laws, which the Ukraine has inherited from the Soviet Union. However, those laws have been cut and cut and cut. And with the war, because people's attention is diverted to the war, the government was able to cut them even more. So, for example, previously Ukrainian workers were protected in case of an illness. Under the new laws, even if you're sick for a single day, you can be fired without any kind of compensation. Previously, our regular working week was 40 hours. Under the new laws, it's 60 hours. Previously, if you had to work in a night shift, you would have to work only 7 hours to get an 8-hour wage. Now this rule has been dropped, so you have to work full hours. Also, any kind of strikes have been forbidden. So if you are unsatisfied with the working conditions, you no longer cannot do any strike. And as I mentioned, you also can no longer get a sick leave without being afraid of getting fired. So workers cannot even make like a semi-protest by going sick on the sick leave, since as a protest, because it will result in the same result of getting fired. And this shows the capitalistic nature of the current Ukrainian government, which uses the war and forces all these new laws into life, because many of those things have been discussed before the war. But even despite, as Max mentioned, the left movement of Ukraine wasn't like really existent, the government wasn't able to push through these laws. Yet, since now there is no real opposition in the parliament, government can do anything at once, and all of those laws have been actually imposed, and workers have lost many and many rights. Those lost rights are not meant like that. There is no point of it's just for the war. Those rights have been lost for good. So it's not just the wartime. It's the rights have been lost, and we will have to fight for them once again. But in these terms, it's only even more inspiring to see how American workers are standing up, and this could lead to great changes. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you again. We definitely recognize there's an uptick in labor activity in the US and I think other corners of the world. And I think some of that is triggered by this conflict in Ukraine and triggering, energy crisis across Europe, right? Triggering, contributing to inflation. I know for us, just where I live personally, our electric company has even said that our bills are going up because of the conflict in Ukraine. And I only see that kind of exacerbating these issues. And hopefully, the good side of it is that it's causing workers to want to struggle more, not just in the US or the UK, but across the world. And, despite all that, the figures still are pretty low, historically speaking, in terms of strike activity and organizing from, say, 40, 50 years ago, prior to the collapse of the Soviet Union. But nonetheless, I think it is definitely a promising development. And, I think, our job here is building deeper connections for proletarian internationalism, deeper connections amongst Marxist organizations across the world, and furthering that goal of working class power. So, thanks again for you all taking the time to be here. For folks who are interested, like Max is posting here, you can find RFU on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. It's usually under RFU Media. Their email is rfumarxist at tutanota.com. And if you can't find their stuff, reach out to us at thevirginiaworker.com and we'll put you in touch. So thanks again, Max and Tanyev, and we'll stay in touch.
Thank you too.
Y'all have a good night.
Good night. It was a great experience to speak with you. Really. Thank you
Same.
very much.